Thank you all for coming. I would like to introduce our first speaker to provide our welcome, Dr. Christine Baptiste. Dr. Baptiste is a senior research fellow at the HEU Center for Health Economics, and she has had several years of experience in the areas of costing of healthcare programs throughout the region, health financing, and she has lectured extensively on these particular topics as well. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce you, Dr. Baptiste.
Good morning. Good morning and welcome to everyone. And thank you, Chair. I would really like to extend a hearty welcome to all of you on behalf of the HEU Center for Health Economics. We would also like at this time to take the opportunity to also pause for a moment to remember the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I would like to mention to all of you our UE Disaster Relief Fund at UE St. Augustine, Trinidad and Tobago is also active. And a link with this information on how you can donate and participate has been shared in the chat. The HEU Center for Health Economics is a regional institution based at the St. Augustine campus of the University of the West Indies in Trinidad. And over the years, the HEU has deepened and expanded its technical support and its research agenda throughout the region and through both center commissioned activities and partner commissioned activities. And we have done this research and technical support in several areas. Some of them include poverty, health and sustainable development, health policy, fiscal policy, costing of health services, pension reform, and social security. And for those of you who may not be familiar with our work, I want to encourage you at this time to visit our website for further information and details on our work in the region. When we think of workers in the informal economy, we think of those who may be wage earners or those who may be self employed. And the extension of social protection to these workers remains challenging for many countries in our region, and where, especially where there may be high and increasing rates of informality. Today's webinar, Social Security and the Informal Economy, addresses the nuances of this topic in the Caribbean context and will be explored by our presenters. The webinar is the second in our series titled Social Security in the Caribbean, Facing the Challenges and Building Resilience. And we are very happy to be sharing with you in this series. And the overall goals of the series are to facilitate regional dialogue on social security in the face of the challenges which we now are participating or experiencing, especially in our economic systems overall and the health system in particular. And another goal of the webinar series, is to share ideas and experiences with each other and to build on some of the best practices so that we can learn from each other. So as we move forward in this webinar series, we will continue to be in contact with many of you who are present here today to draw on your wealth of experience and to invite you to continue to contribute to our discussions as panelists. So once again, welcome to all of you. The chair of our webinar today is Dr. Kimberly Ann Gittens Baines, and she holds a PhD in economics with high commendation from the UE St. Augustine campus. She's currently a researcher here at the HEU Center for Health Economics and has over 14 years of experience working in the area of health economics. The areas of research include health program costing, health behavior, health related decision making, non communicable diseases, child protection and health, and social policy for persons living with disabilities. At this time, it is my pleasure to hand you over to the chair for our webinar today, Dr. Kimberly Ann Gittins-Baines. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Laptiste. And good morning once again to everyone, panelists and participants. I'd like to introduce our first speaker for today, this morning, Mr. Ariel Pino, who is the Social Protection and Occupational Safety and Health Specialist of the Decent Work Team of the ILO Office for the Caribbean. Mr. Pino assists governments, employers, and workers' organizations of ILO Caribbean member states and territories to strengthen their social protection systems and occupational safety and health policies and practices. Mr. Pino has been working in the area of social protection for the past 24 years in a range of countries, from Senegal and West Africa. He was also stationed in Geneva at the International Social Security Association, where he acted as regional coordinator for the Americas and Africa and coordinator of technical commissions. Mr. Pino has a degree in economics and postgraduate degrees in public economics and in pension plans and funds. I give the floor over to Mr. Pino for his presentation, Social Security and the Informal Economy, the Regional Picture.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Gittins. Good morning, everyone. And we also express our sentiments from sympathy and solidarity with the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, praying that the volcano remains quiet for a long time. Today, I'll be doing a presentation about the informal economy and how social protection can be actually a driver for formalization. The presentation contains big five elements, and we'll start by the informal sector features. We then move something about holistic approach and talk about incentives, some actions that could be taken, examples, and finally, some conclusions. So when we talk about informal economy, it's important to remind what we are talking about and have an idea of the magnitude of this phenomenon. We recently published a brief about the informal economy and COVID-19, but for Latin America and the Caribbean, the largest study we did was 2018, when the prevalence of the informal economy was about 53% in Latin America and the Caribbean, representing about 140 million workers, right? Despite that impressive numbers, we also experienced that since 2005, there were improvements in the formalization or the transitions from the informal economy to the formal economy, and this managed to include 39 million workers in the formal sector. But today, at worldwide level, we still have more than six workers among 10 in the informal economy. And when it talks about enterprises, this figure is as high as 8 among 10. So this is certainly something that needs to be addressed. We also see that this phenomenon is more prevalent when we talk about developing countries. And certainly there is the impact it is per and affecting more women and vulnerable persons in developing countries. Also, we have seen that the normal non-standard forms of employment are emerging as a globalization and the improvements in technology also increase the precariousness of employment and led to more informality. And finally, hazardous events man-made or natural disasters also push people to informality. Although I should say that at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, in statistical terms, we haven't seen a lot of that at the beginning of the pandemic, and this is simply because a lot of people turned into inactivity. We haven't seen an increase in the informal rates at the beginning of the pandemic, but the reason is because people were reporting that they were inactive. There was a good study from women in the informal economy NGO, WIGO, in 2012 that created this nice pyramid in terms of who are more prone to be in the informal economy, and then how this is impacting in terms of poverty, in terms of earnings, and also in terms of segmentation. So it is very clear that in the informal economy, women are more affected with high risk of poverty and generally talking about low income. It's not easy to define or characterize the informal economy. The ILO, we have a statistical framework that we use and we promote in countries to measure informality. And this is a bit of a summary of this model. So you have let me show it as. So you have in this part here, you will have the formal sector. At this part, you will have the informal sector, and then at the bottom, you have households. So what here are saying that there is a group which is within this circle of informal employment, informal economy, that can come from employees in the formal sector, but they have informal employment, which is another important definition. Contributory family workers in the formal sector are characterized as part of the informal economy. And then we also have those who are operating in the informal sector as such, whether they are employees, entrepreneurs, contributory family workers, or also own account workers. So this is the definition that we use when we talk about the informal economy. It's quite complex and difficult to measure if we don't have reliable labor force surveys that can help us to measure. Here you can see a bit of the distribution, how the category of employment in 2017 around the world and for the Americas, where we can see that the majority of employment relationships are characterized by employee relationships, 71% for males, 76% for women. Then we have employers, and we have own account workers and contributory family workers in the 21-24% for male and female. So these are the ones that are in the bottom of the pyramid I talked to you about. And as you can compare with other regions of the world, so the situation is much better than when you have large informal economy sectors in Asia and Pacific and in Africa. But still, this figure of 53% is somewhere around here, together with some part of informal employment within the employees in the formal sector. So it's important to understand key issues about the informal economy, barriers, and some of them are listed here. There are low volumes of sales and treasury problems, and this is also aggravated at the start of operations of economic units in the informal economy. Reduced contributory capacity is also characteristic of the informal economy. But we have to be very careful here, because there are a lot of business units that actually have a lot of contributory capacity and revenue, and actually are hiding in the informal economy. So when we design policies, we need to be careful that this is not an emergency exit for those who want actually to hide in the informal economy. That's why it's important to understand the informal economy. Limit low administrative and accounting capacities. The workplace may be fixed or not. For example, when we see street vendors, it's a characteristic of that. Levels of the organization of representation is not always uh, um, uh, present in the countries or in the regions, which make things even more difficult when we want to formalize them, or at least make them help them transition to the formal sector. There is lack of knowledge in terms of legal and tax frameworks. People don't know, or workers in informal economy don't know exactly what is the legal framework that applies to them, or the tax framework. And one very important thing is that they don't see a clear benefit to become formal, and apparently the social security benefits are not an incentive enough per se for them to become formal. They also express many times the high cost of formalization, red tape, and this is not just in terms of monetary terms, but also in terms of time. And every time these people are not at work, so they don't have income. It's not like an employee that may have a salary or a wage. So every time they don't work, they don't get income. I mean, they have to spend days in the administration to become formal. So that's a deterrent for them. The tax compliance situation is also certainly a complex matter for the informal economy. I said before about access to financing and public bidding process. So procurement can also be formalization friendly, I could say, and can actually promote formalization processes. And in some instances, we see that the legal framework or the social protection coverage of the expertise at the government level is not there to foster people to transit to the formal economy. So when we talk about the target groups, we see that for the Caribbean, it's important to talk about the self-employed on-account workers. There is an evolving characteristic of platform-based workers, and the pandemic has also fostered this trend. Micro-enterprises, household workers, rural workers, fishers, small commerce, taxi drivers, street food vendors, and the collaborative economy from the cooperative sector. So what we want to do in the process of formalization is actually close this circle and make this informal sector, informal economy smaller. And for that, the ILO approach follows a two-track approach, which not only talks about the extension of Social Security, but also adopt a more comprehensive package of responses that facilitate the transition from the informal to the formal economy. And this is because on the one hand, social protection, of course, protect people and have positive outcomes in terms of health, education, income security. But on the other hand, we know that formal employment also has an important impact in the socio-economic, in the economic performance of the country. And these people, by participating in the whole economy, actually, they are also creating fiscal space for the expansion of social protection programs. And this is recognized in the ILO recommendation 202 on the social protection floor and 204 in the transition from the informal to the formal economy. The holistic approach is also looking at providing the right incentive to people. We know that even if we put legislation that made mandatory business to be registered or a business unit to contribute to Social Security, we see in the experience that it doesn't happen, and just an indicator is the low level of coverage of the self-employed in the Caribbean. So the right incentives is what probably will motivate those business units and workers in the informal economy to become formal. So tax reform is something that can help to contribute to capacity. We know that for thresholds of tax legislation, probably this business unit in the informal economy, they don't have to pay taxes, but still they have to file claims and they have to go through the whole process. So some simplification probably in that area could be. And also on the other hand, we know that the marginal revenue that the tax authorities get from the informal sector, when we compare with the efforts that they have to put, is very low. So they don't pay too much attention to that, and they prefer to go to the big fish and not the small fish. The employment policies are very important also to formalize the simplification of procedures. The organization of the informal sector, I would say that is a key element, and without that, it's very difficult to success in the formalization. Promoting the creation of small micro enterprises, giving access to credit, providing access to credit, training, education, housing, and of course, paying particular attention to, as I mentioned before, gender, youth, disabled people, and these groups that are more prone to be in the informal economy and more affected by that. In terms of what social protection can do is basically social protection can be the entry door for a holistic formalization process. And we have seen from experience that voluntary schemes don't work. So it has to be mandatory. And we have still voluntary schemes for the self-employed in Belize and Vincent and the Grenadines, St. Lucia, and we don't have any coverage in Trinidad and Tobago. So it has to be mandatory, but again, looking into the right incentive. The implementation should be progressive, and you cannot start by trying to cover all the informal economy in once, and you have to start by those groups in which you know that you can have success, because this is then like a snowball, and the others can trust in the social security institution if it works. Otherwise, it will be difficult then. If you start by groups that they don't work, the others probably will not follow. Address the needs. So pay attention to the needs of this business unit and provide the right incentives to them attached to social security affiliation. Good practice also is to provide contribution subsidies to specific groups, particularly at the beginning of operations or the beginning of formalization. And then with time, these subsidies are decreasing. For example, in the first 5 years of operation, you can subsidize part of the contributions, and then in 5 years, no more. Use a lot of IT. And we have seen in COVID-19 times how most of the unemployment benefits that were implemented in a very short period of time, they had to rely on IT for registration and then the use of different electronic payment mechanisms. So it's important to use, I could say, all the information that has been collected to pay the emergency unemployment benefits and to use that information in the good sense, and probably look into different options with those who received emergency unemployment benefits to become formal. Work with them and not just for them. This is important too, because they are the only ones that can tell you what they need and what they want. And if they don't include them from the very beginning, then the buy-in is difficult. The contribution payments linkages with the operational businesses is something that is very important, but it shouldn't be on the burden of the worker in the informal economy. There should be I would say, office procedures in which the different government institutions can communicate among themselves to actually make sure that someone, for example, if you want to renew a license or to do operations, they need this being up to date or good standing with contribution collection. And as I said before, use and collect the information as much as possible, because it's difficult to make a declarative scheme as you can have with employer and employee, because here it's only the self-employed that is provided the information. What is also very important is to design gradized strategies from social assistance programs, because we don't want people to live all their life in social assistance. So develop a graduation strategy, public employment program, skills development. I talked about creation of enterprises, job matching, etc., public employment services, so these people can transit from social assistance to the formal employment. Some examples you can find in Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, and France, simplified schemes where they actually merged taxes and social security contributions and actually provided a very impressive increase in the coverage of the self-employed. In Costa Rica, you have subsidies for the agricultural sector and low-income workers working very good. Collective registration and payment mechanisms. And that means outsourcing part of the activities of the Social Security organizations to these groups that are representing workers in the informal economy. Very important and very good results in Europe in terms of domestic workers, household workers, that they can be paid with a voucher that the employer actually buy at the bank, who is also registered with the authorities, and the employer declares payments online. So it's very effective way. It doesn't have a lot of red tape, and actually the employer can deduct a part of these payments into the tax revenue declaration. And then in some Asian countries where the legislation was not adequate for companies with low number of employees, they actually reduce the threshold. So for example, if you only have 1 or 2 employees, you also have to register, and before there was a minimum of 5 or 10. So I would say, to conclude, to address the issue of informal economy requires a holistic approach, and it's a whole state effort, and also including those business units in the informal economy. It's impossible to have success if you don't address what they need. So you need to understand what they need, and you have to offer at least something that they can feel comfortable in becoming formal. Work in the organization of the informal sector is fundamental, because the social security institutions, they don't have the resources to reach them, and those business units operating in the informal sector, they don't want to be known by the administration. So this asymmetry of information can be actually channeled through intermediaries. I talked about the needs and the incentives, so it's not just making mandatory a scheme means that affiliation will increase and coverage will increase. Don't look at voluntary schemes because they don't work. Start small and get bigger with success. Engage the business unit in social dialogue, and build capacities not only on the intermediaries and on the business unit, but also at the government level on how to address the formalization process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pino, for your presentation and helping us there in seeing the nuances of the informal economy and the issues and barriers that may exist there that may encourage persons to remain in the informal economy due to the high cost of formalization in terms of their time, etc. So thanks once more, Mr. Pino. We are moving on now to our next speaker, who is Ms. Megan Sylvester. She's a senior lecturer, music sociologist, researcher, and published author. She's a senior lecturer with responsibility for research methods and sociology academic programs at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies in Trinidad and Tobago. And she's also the author of several book chapters and journal articles. She specializes in labor market research with the creative industry sector in particular. Music is her focal point of her research and publications. She is a graduate of the University of the West Indies St. Augustine campus, where she recently completed her PhD in the sociology of music. And the focus of her research was the narratives of resistance in calypso and raga soca music. Ms. Sylvester is also a board member of the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians Organization, TUCU, and is the chair of the organization's Education and Research Committee. I would now like to invite Ms. Sylvester to present on the topic, Social Security, a perspective from the creative sector.
Okay, So good morning, everyone, again. I am going to be sharing this morning from the creative industries sector, just to give you a sense of what is happening in terms of social security. Now, as Dr. Gittins Baines has mentioned, I'm covering two areas coming from both Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, and also I'm going to be sharing the perspective from the TUCO organization, Trinbago Unified Calypsonians organization, because we really want to get a sense as that is the example of the creative industry sector that I'm going to be focusing on. I start off by looking at a sense of understanding two perspectives of social security because they have bearing on the presentation. From a social policy perspective, there are two dominant perspectives, one that's hailing from the US and one is hailing from the British. Countries which still remain dependent on the British Crown and former British colonized nations have interpreted social security to mean monetary assistance from the state for people with an inadequate or low income. From the United States perspective, Social Security is understood to mean federal insurance scheme providing benefits for pensioners and those who are unemployed or disabled. In this particular presentation, I'm going to be focusing on the UK or British variant. Now, let's get a sense of what is really meant by the creative industries sector. These are industries which have their origin in individual creativity, skill, and talent, and which have a potential for wealth and job creation through the generation and exploitation of intellectual property. Another perspective is that the term creative industries describes businesses with creativity at their heart. For example, design, music, publishing, architecture, film, video, crafts, visual arts, fashion, etc. And so what we want to do now is to have a sense of what the UNESCO understands in terms of creative industries. The profession of an artist generally does not lead to having a permanent employer and steady income. However, artists remain liable for all taxes, including contributions to the state social insurance fund and the state health insurance fund, and thus find themselves in a vulnerable position regarding social security. So, what we immediately realize is that there is a working definition of creative industries. There's a UNESCO perspective of how we see the creative sector and what it really means for the artists. And then we also understand that there is a perspective coming from the US and the UK. As I indicated earlier, we're going to be focusing in this presentation on the UK variant. And we're going to use Trinidad and Tobago as a subset of that, having been a former British colony. And according to what is said in terms of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, we see that has special responsibility for the creative industry sector in Trinidad and Tobago. We see that the creative industries is defined as the interface between creativity, culture, economics, and technology, as expressed in the ability to create and circulate intellectual capital with the potential to generate income, jobs, and export earning, while at the same time promoting social inclusion, cultural diversity, and human development. And this is according to the UNCTAD's 2008 report for the creative economy. And Trinidad and Tobago, in terms of the Ministry of Trade and Industry, has followed closely on this perspective. The
Can you go
creative
first
industry,
name, please?
the
First
creative,
name.
the creative
Sorry.
industry of Trinidad and Tobago cluster comprises 8 subsectors in particular. The Ministry of Trade and Industry has been given responsibility for following subsectors as a priority for business development. And that becomes important for us to understand in terms of these 8 sectors. But then as we look at the creative industry sector and what we want to focus on today, we're looking at that focus of music, film, and fashion. And as I said at the top of the presentation, we really want to focus on TUCO as a subset of music and as a further subset of the creative industries sector. Now let's just look at what it is we're focusing on when we look at TUCO. All right, so TUCO is the Trinbago Unified Calypsonians Organization. And for the purposes of this paper, the creative industry sector will focus on music, as I said, and particular on the Calypso art form. And this is what TUCO is responsible for. That is, in the main, the provision of social security protection for its membership. Now, I need to tell you that the membership of TUCO is not only Calypsonians themselves. You would have soca performers who wish to come under the umbrella of TUCO, because TUCO really acts as a lobbying agent as well as a union for Calypsonians. We also afford other persons within the society, like calypso aficionados and anybody who's involved in a music fraternity who wishes to become a member of TUCO, to get that protection, albeit sometimes social security protection. But because TUCO acts as this lobbying agent with the Ministry of Culture, it really works well for many performers to become a member of TUCO. And then we look now in Trinidad and Tobago, when referring to the Calypso fraternity, there's an understanding that artists generally make most of their earnings during the carnival season, and at other seasonal opportunities at local Calypso shows and at diaspora carnivals in international spaces. Now, what becomes important for you to note at this point is that Carnival is not the only time when you have Calypso shows or showcases. You have several Calypso competitions taking place all throughout the year. You have the Independence Calypso competition, and you have the month of October, especially set aside as Calypso History Month. And in that month, you have several competitions taking place. Labor Day is another period when you have Calypso competitions taking place. And so these are the opportunities that are provided for the Calypsonian within the local space to perform and to earn a living. What we recognize, as indicated in this particular point as well, is that there are diasporic carnivals. We talk about Spice Mass in Grenada, we talk about Caribana, we talk about the Labor Day Festival in New York, we talk about DC Carnival, we talk about LA Carnival, and there are also a host of carnivals that take place in the Caribbean, St. Martin, as we speak about Vincy Mass, etc. And so it becomes important to note these are the opportunities for Calypsonians to perform. But what does this really mean in terms of social security and protection? What we recognize is this lack of steady employment, because it's so seasonal, therefore resembles more a reality of non-permanency and irregular income. In such cases, okay, so I continue by speaking to the whole issue of the irregularity of the income that is, part of what the Calypsonian has to deal with. And in such cases, TUCO, which is the organization which has responsibility in terms of social protection for marketing and research, education and research, public relations, and welfare matters related to Calypsonians and soca artists, it becomes now important to see what specific policies are put in place for social protection for the Calypsonian, given the fact that they are faced with this irregularity of income. Here we have a list that speaks to what we provide. So we have been partnering with several NGOs and other organizations within the community to provide these social protection services. One such is Living Waters Community, and we have had an engagement with them for 2 years for the provision of food items, hampers, toiletries, and household items. How does this come about? This is specifically targeted. Let's say we look at festive times of the year. All right, let's look at the example of Christmas, for example, where we engage Living Waters communities and they provide these types of items. What we also do is based on an as-needs basis. So Calypsonians, soca performers, individuals who are members of TUCO can actually come to TUCO and actually engage us and say, listen, these are our needs, and we then work with Living Waters communities to provide these. We see listed there as well the Field Foundation, the Foundation for the Enhancement and Enrichment of Life. We have had a 15-year relationship with this organization to provide similar items, food items and household items. And so again, this is provided for our membership all throughout the year, in particular with Field. We then have HDC, the Housing Development Corporation. And this becomes important for us to note because this may not be a feature that the general public may be aware of. But in terms of the provision of assistance with the acquisition of housing, we walk through the process with our membership to ensure that they have access, at the very least, to the opportunity to get public housing. And then we look at some of the features that the Ministry of Social Development would provide, such as food cards, social assistance, and the Special Achievers Grant. Now, in particular, the Special Achievers Grant would be for some of the stalwarts in our community and we don't want to name any names because part of this social security protection that we provide from TUCO is that we do not make this information public. All right, and so that is something that is important to note. But we talk about the stalwarts in Calypso who have specially achieved over the years. They are privy to this grant that the Ministry of Social Development provides, and they get this on a monthly basis. Most recently, and we're talking about 2021, we have actually engaged Tatil as an insurance provider to provide health insurance for TUCO members. And interestingly, we are in the early stages of getting this organized in terms of the provision of all of the regular. We're talking about dental, we're talking about optical, etc. All of the regular features that an insurance policy would provide. We have just recently started to work with Tatil to provide this for our membership. And it becomes important for us to consider these points because we talk about the non-permanence, or we talk about the irregularity of the income, and it becomes important to understand that there is, from the TUCO perspective, representing this this particular grouping of Calypsonians, this is what we provide. And as I come to the end of my conclusion, the end of my presentation, sorry, in the conclusion, TUCO remains committed to servicing and serving its members via this social security platform through the welfare office. So I want to take a minute just to speak about where can our membership access these services. They can come to the TUCO offices. We have several zones across the community. We have an East zone, we have a South zone, we have a North zone, and we have a zone in Tobago. So we see that we're covering both the landscape of Tobago and Trinidad. And each office has a welfare officer that heads up a welfare office, and it is through that office that our membership can access these opportunities for social security. And we continue to work with non-governmental organizations to provide these services. So I just wanted to share with you this morning a little snippet about how TUCO, as the only organization in Trinidad and Tobago, which represents a body of musicians, right, in terms of either being a lobby group or a union, is able to provide social security as we partner with the government and NGOs to provide these services. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sylvester. That was a really enlightening presentation. Uh, they're telling us all about what TUCO has done in partnership with the government with regard to social security. I think this provides a different perspective for discussion, and I know that it would have generated questions among participants. Thank you once more, Dr. Sylvester. As we go along, please feel free to enter your questions in the chat, and at our discussion segment, our presenters will address them. Our next presenter is Mr. Chanel Thompson, who is a national of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and he is the acting deputy director of the research department of the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. Prior to this, he served in the capacity as an economist within the technical unit and the country economist unit of the research department. Since joining the bank in 2014 and his transition to the technical unit, his work has been primarily focused on financial stability and monetary and exchange rate analysis. More recently, however, his work has expanded to policies relating to social protection, including those related to social security. Mr. Thompson holds a BSc and an MSc from the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus, and he's currently pursuing his PhD in economics. And I would not like to take any more time. I would like to introduce Mr. Thompson, who will be presenting on social security and the informal economy in the Eastern Caribbean. Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Thank you, Dr. Gittins-Baines, for that introduction. And I'll just share my screen quite quickly. Yes, so thank you and good morning again. And I would like to also take the opportunity to thank you for allowing me to share this presentation with you today and to express my solidarity as well with my people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and those who may be supporting them with relief efforts during this time. The presentation is entitled Social Security and the Informal Economy in the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. And just to give you a sense of where we'll be going with this presentation today, I'll just give you a broad overview of the currency union as it stands currently. I'll speak briefly to the informal economy, social security systems in the region, and then the challenges that the social security systems will face and potentially resolving these challenges within the ECCU and concluding. Now, in terms of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union, it is comprised of 8 member countries, sorry, 2 of which are dependencies of overseas dependencies of the United Kingdom, and the other 6 are independent states. Based on our estimates, our GDP estimates from 2019 and 2020, GDP was estimated at about $5.8 billion in 2019, and it would have declined, sorry, to $5.1 billion in 2020 owing to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the overall population of the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union is a little over 650,000 persons. So as you can see, we're quite small, but put together, we're making an impact. Now, in terms of the informal economy within the ECCU, the ECCU, the social security systems within the currency union follows the guidance provided by the ILO on the informal economy. And Mr. Pino would have spoken to this broad guidance and the broad definition surrounding the informal economy. Now, the informal economy has implications for tax incidence within the region and income distribution as well. And just to keep in mind that when we speak about the informal economy, we are not speaking primarily about illegal activities. Normally, when the discussion comes up about the informal economy, the individual switches to the illegal activities, whether it is drug peddling or anything of that sort. But it can be separated into legal and illegal activities. So persons who may be working at homes, persons who may be producing for themselves for consumption, and even our fisher folk. Now, in terms of measuring the informal economy, it is really important that we understand what the size of the informal economy looks like. And this has been a particular challenge over the years. If you go through the literature, you'd see several different approaches to measuring the informal economy. But why is this important in terms of the measurement? Well, one, we want to understand how it affects financial soundness and sustainability of social security systems, which is essentially why we're here today. We also know that there is a positive relationship between the size of the informal economy and tax evasion. So as the informal economy gets larger, it's more likely that there will be a higher incidence of tax evasion within the economy. But conversely, the size of the informal economy can also provide an estimate of potential revenue gain from tax reforms and guide governments in that way. And so these are 3 of some of the reasons why we should determine what that measurement is and come to an understanding about it. Now, within the ECCU, the measurement of the informal economy, we have done up to this point, I believe, 1 or 2 key research areas. And what it showed us was that the informal economy, when we zeroed in on one particular country, for example, Antigua and Barbuda, it averaged over about a 27-year period up to 2014, 2015, about 71%. And that 71% is really representative of what we've seen coming out of some of the literature for other CARICOM member states. It shows that essentially it falls somewhere between mid-50s up to about 60-65%. Obviously, within the ECCU, there will be variations on this based on the structure of the economy, the size of the populations, etc. But what we can understand from this simple measurement is that it is a large but stable percentage of GDP. Now, when you have a large informal economy, and if we were to take that 71% and extend it to some of the other ECCU member countries, what you would see eventually happening is that some of the employed workers may not receive sufficient social protection. And when they don't receive sufficient social protection, and when the informal economy becomes too large, it then creates imbalances for social security systems. And so it creates imbalances for social security systems, sorry. So when we look at the social security systems within the ECCU, we know that they would have started off primarily as national provident funds prior to the 1980s, and then they would have been transformed into national insurance schemes, and then later retitled into national insurance systems. They're established in all 8 member countries, and they continue to implement and develop parametric reforms within the ECCU. Now, looking at social security systems in particular, in terms of the asset base, the asset base was estimated at about $2.5 billion US dollars at the end of 2019. And this is approximately 33% of GDP. And so you can see, obviously, how important social security systems are to the economies of the region. When we look at their contribution to the overall financial system, it was estimated in 2019 that their deposits were approximately 8% of bank deposits. So there's not just a real sector implication for the presence of social security systems within the economy, but there's also a financial sector and inevitably a financial stability implication for their presence there. Now, social security systems within the ECCU face several challenges. One of them I would have spoken to earlier implicitly would be the population size. Now, with a population of over 650,000 people, what you're really looking at is a narrow contribution base. And in combination with this narrow contribution base, over the last few years, we've had low levels of economic growth and productivity in the country, in the member countries. And these would have led to funding pressures within the social security system. But when you have periods of low levels of economic growth, what you're going to see happening is really a shift away from the formal sector of employment towards the more informal sector or informal employment. Mr. Pino would have also mentioned the presence of natural disasters. And so, for example, the volcanic eruption in St. Vincent is likely to cause some of that shift. If you have hurricanes occurring, you're also likely to see that shift. And when that shift occurs, that shift away from the formal sector towards the informal sector, what happens is that there's a reduction in contribution levels to social security systems. And then that exacerbates any of the funding pressures which currently exist within the region. Now, some of the other challenges which exist, and the first main one would be really capturing the informal economy. Now, it's not just the measurement of the informal economy by institutions such as the central bank, but it's really the measurement of the informal economy by the social security systems themselves. And currently, there are different approaches, mainly qualitative, which are used to assess the level of the informal economy within the social security systems data, within the social security systems data set. But essentially, what you have overall occurring within the region is a low coverage of the informal sector and the self-employed. Combined with that, you also have incidences of fraudulent activity. which the social security systems are continually working to reduce. Now, how do we resolve some of these challenges? So within the context of the currency union, one of the key things would be to continue promoting gender equality and women's empowerment. There was a recent report coming out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines that indicated that female-headed households, for example, are more likely to face higher levels of unemployment when compared with male-headed households. What that means is that when those individuals, when those women are forced to find less formal means of employment, then it affects inevitably coverage within the region. The other portion of it would be to continually work towards the identification of the most vulnerable segments of the informal economy. And this matters particularly when you have situations such as COVID-19, where social security systems that may not have necessarily had a benefits program allotted towards unemployment would have facilitated transfers to various segments of the economy, including the informal economy. Now, just to note here, there are obviously specific rules that go along with those transfers, but you can see where when those segments are not identified, how it can lead to an exacerbation of pressures on the social security system. The other potential resolution is a continued expansion of the self-employment contribution mechanism. Now, within St. Vincent and St. Lucia, these are currently voluntary, and so persons are encouraged to sign up on their own and contribute through the social security system, contribute to the social security system. But as long as you work towards the expansion of that contribution mechanism, then we are able to increase, you're able to draft more persons from the informal economy into formal contributions. One of the opportunities that exists also within the resolution of these challenges would be increasing coverage, especially in new industries. And in St. Vincent in particular, you will note that marijuana production a few years ago would have been illegal. So the production of any marijuana plants would have been an illegal activity. With changes in regulation and change in laws, you would now have the developing medicinal cannabis industry. And with that, there's an opportunity for persons to move from the illegal informal employment portion, which is what people tend to focus on, to the more legal, if even informal economy or informal employment, or even move into formal employment where you have an established co-op of growers, or you have an established company. And so there's an opportunity here, not just in St. Vincent, but other countries that are pursuing medicinal cannabis to increase coverage of the informal sector and to increase coverage for social security systems in general. Resolving some of these challenges would also mean making adjustments to your doing business indicators, for example. So one of these would be reducing or removing the barriers to business formation within your countries. The second would be reducing tax system complexity and strengthening the enforcement and compliance laws. And these all go together. When you reduce or remove barriers to business formation, you're actually encouraging smaller business to take a step in from the informal to the more formal sector of the economy. And by reducing your tax system complexity and making it less burdensome to file taxes or to pay your taxes at the end of the day, then you actually encourage and reduce, you encourage tax payment, and you reduce incidences of tax avoidance and tax evasion. And then you just have to continue combining this with any with your compliance and enforcement of those compliance laws. So just to conclude, I just want you to remember that measuring the informal economy in the ECCU is a challenge, not just for the region, not just for the currency union, but for the region, the Caribbean region as a whole. But the social security systems within the region continue to implement reforms to enhance their financial soundness and to expand coverage and to capture those areas that they were not capturing before. And this opportunity still exists to develop these new industries and to expand that coverage. And some of the resolution approaches to these challenges would be both reducing the barriers to business formation and promoting gender equality. And so thank you very much for listening, and I'll wait for your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your presentation and enlightening us on issues faced in the Eastern Caribbean and providing us as well with some ideas in terms of how these issues might be addressed in terms of reducing the barriers to business formation, promoting gender equality. And you also spoke there as well with regard to the implications of the low coverage in the informal sector and the self-employed persons. So this is good food for thought as we move on to our next presenter, who is Ms. Portia Magnus, who is the Director of National Insurance in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security in Jamaica, a position that she has held for the past 10 years. Ms. Magnus joined the Ministry of Labor and Social Security in 1997 and has held various portfolios over the years. In addition to her experience, her years of experience, Ms. Magnus holds an MBA in General Management and postgraduate diplomas in Public Sector Senior Management Development and Public Sector Senior Leadership Development. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Magnus to speak on Social Security and the informal economy, the Jamaican experience. Welcome, Ms. Magnus.
Are you able to hear me now? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you, Madam Chairperson, fellow panelists, participants. Good morning. Let me begin by saying thank you for the invitation to participate and also extend or I don't even know how to say it, but that just to say that our prayers are with the people in St. Vincent and the Grenadines and also Barbados that has been impacted by the volcano. So I'll begin to share my screen. So the presentation this morning will be done in the following order. First, we will briefly at Social Security in Jamaica, and then social insurance, the informal economy in Jamaica, social insurance and the informal economy, and then points for consideration. Now, in terms of social security, there are a number of variables that makes up social security. So we have social insurance, housing, social assistance, health services, education, transportation, food, you name it. Social security really is a wide area, and it's not provided by any one institution in Jamaica. Now, in Jamaica, the perspective that we'll be taking this morning is a social insurance perspective from Jamaica. And now social insurance in Jamaica is provided by the National Insurance Scheme. The National Insurance Scheme is a part of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. And so unlike your National Insurance Board in Trinidad and Tobago, which is a standalone entity, National Insurance Scheme is very much a part of central government. And so what is NIS, which is what we call it in short in Jamaica? It is a compulsory contributory system of Social Security, which offers some financial protection to contributors and their families against loss of income arising from injury on the job, incapacity, retirement, and or death through a range of benefits. And the benefits include maternity. They cover maternity, health, such as health insurance, employment injury benefit, invalidity benefit, survivors benefits for children and adults, or retirement pension and death benefits as well in the form of employment injury, death, and funeral grant. Now, in order to receive any of these benefits, then persons will be required to not only register with the NIS, but to contribute consistently during their work life. Now, let us look at informality in Jamaica. Now, the informal economy is said to be the set of economic activities, enterprises, jobs, and workers that are not regulated or protected by the state. And so in informal employment, no, it is related to persons whose main job lacks basic social or legal protection or employment benefits such as the NIS. And here we're using definition from our own Statistical Institute of Jamaica. So what are we seeing? That a person whose main job is not in agriculture or domestic employment is counted as working in the informal sector if his or her present job satisfies any of the following conditions. Now, this person may be an all-account worker, an employer who own their own business. There may be family members who contribute to the business as well and they're not paid. And the employee and the employer just don't contribute to the NIS at all. And to point out, agricultural persons in agriculture and domestic employment are not included in the informal sector. Now let's have a look at the population profile of Jamaica. Now, we look at data from October 2018, 2019, and 2020. And as a former student of HEU myself, we do know that we're not to stray from like variables. And so the data for January 2021 is just to provide a point of interest. And so we see now, looking at the population of Jamaica, it has held steady at roughly 2.7 million from 2018 to 2020, steadily decreasing. Jamaica is an aging population, but unfortunately, we do have some unpleasant variables and activities that add to our death rate. Now, let's look at our labor force. There has been a bit of fluctuation in our labor force from 1.334 million in October 2018. Then it increased a tad bit to 1.345 in October 2019. And in COVID in October 2020, now we see a decline of 41,900 persons to 1.293 million. Now, the employed labor force, we look at closely in the NIS because the employed labor force is inextricably linked to our contributions coming into the scheme. So in October 2018, there were 1.219 persons in the employed labor force, then 2019, 1.248, and we can see that reduction in October 2020, and this is 65,100 persons. Looking at the unemployment rate in October 2018, it was 8.7%. It was said that things are looking up for economy. We see that the unemployment rate went down to 7.2%, but then COVID landed in Jamaica and October 2020, during the pandemic, we're still in pandemic mode at 10.7%. Now, when we look at, say, October, not really a comparison per se, but when we say looking at a few months from October to January, we can see a slight increase in the labor force, in a few months in January, and we are seeing a reduction in the unemployment rate as well in January 2021. Now, research over the years has said that the informal sector is about 40% of the Jamaican economy, and the data for October 2019 show that in persons in informal jobs amounted to over 477,000, and in 2018 and in 2019, 479,500. Now, what will be interesting is a deeper study of what the numbers truly now would be after COVID is over to see the true impact of this COVID-19 pandemic. Now let's take a closer look at those who make up the informal sector in Jamaica. So it's mainly men at 58.2%. Persons in the informal sector have absolutely no qualifications at all, not even one CXC. The main industry employing persons in the informal sector is said to be the wholesale and retail trade and repair of motor vehicles and equipment. Mainly men, the bulk of men are employed in this industry, the same for women, but naturally in terms of wholesale and retail. For the men, the industry which follows next is construction. And I must say that even during COVID, there is a boom in construction taking place in Jamaica. While for the females, the industry that follows next is hotels and restaurant services. Now, in terms of where people reside who are employed in the informal sector, it's mainly in our rural area, accounting for some 44.7%. I must point out that in terms of places of residence that Statin considers, that's the Statistical Institute of Jamaica, there's rural, there is urban, which would be our Kingston and metropolitan area in Jamaica, which is the most developed area in our country. And there's also other urban centers. So in terms of where people reside who are engaged in informal employment is mainly in our rural areas. And for the men, yes, they and the women, they also in informal employment, they reside mainly in our rural areas. In terms of the age of persons involved in informal employment, we can see that the bulk of persons are really 35 to 44 years, but closely followed by those who are 25 to 34 years. And from 25 to 44 years, these are our peak there are peak work years, so that is a cause for concern. Now, from the perspective of the NIS, which provides social insurance, for us to look at the informal economy, we're going to be looking at the self-employed because a bulk of the informal sector is made up of self-employed person. So our data a bit old, this data that I'm using here, and this from about 2014, 2015, is saying that our labor force for the self-employed is about 40%, which is consistent with other international studies and our own research in terms of pension coverage was that it's only 5% of self-employed persons who contribute to NIS. When we look at the employed labor force, 37% are own account workers and only 3% contribute to NIS. So the data here actually is consistent in saying that the bulk of persons in the informal sector, one of the criterion is that they're not registered at all. Now, in looking at informality, there are a number of points that we need to take into consideration. Even before COVID, we know that there was some shifting in terms of labor market dynamics as we see further advances in technology. And so we have begun contemplating the platform economy. And this is where we have economic and social activity being facilitated by electronic platforms. And how many persons shop on Amazon, how many persons are using Google, how many persons are doing, making reservations using Airbnb? Are we not now making online payments? Let's look now, we have to consider also the gig economy. So there's a shift in trend in employment towards shorter term contract-based work, which is increasingly now being done online. And for us in social insurance, the NIS in Jamaica and institutions similar to us, especially in the Caribbean, how do we then ensure that we enforce compliance to ensure that there's increase in coverage? And once we can increase coverage, then the level of informality also reduces when we are no longer, it's not so much going into concrete structures with business name clearly seen, but operations activities now are online. So these are points of consideration for us. Now, we cannot but help to look at COVID-19. So COVID-19 landed in Jamaica in March of 2019. What did we see? Like elsewhere, restrictions in movement and social distancing protocols. But what impact did this have on our businesses? Well, reduced business hours here in Jamaica. We have curfews, sometimes days, sometimes for every time for hours. But there's reduced business hours, reduced number then of customers customers in businesses, especially those, say, hairdressers and barbers, persons going in where there's social distancing requirements. There's then loss of income. We have seen scale down in operations, and a lot of instances, we do have businesses closed. Businesses being closed, not just in the formal sector, but in the informal sector, and the cries are getting louder and louder. What did COVID-19 also show, especially for those in the informal sector, that there will be no government assistance because you do not meet the requirements, such as having a tax registration number to qualify for the financial assistance. What did we see again? A renewed interest in unemployment insurance as persons lost their livelihood. But Jamaica does not now offer unemployment insurance. Exclusion from government assistance program. So last year, the government started an initiative which it's called the CARE program, specific to COVID, but a requirement was registration, and our informal sector workers are not registered. So there is a shift now we see from a thinking of what is in it for me to what have I lost and what do I stand to lose out on. So why do I say this? Well, the Companies Office of Jamaica reported that when it compared its data for 2019 with its data for 2020, there was an increase of 12% in the registration of business names, so some 12,809 business names registered, and also a 3% increase in the registration of new businesses. What was said here? That a number of businesses that were operating in the informal sector have now sought to register, and there's also a number of new businesses being started by persons who have lost their jobs. So the exclusion from government assistance during periods of crisis, such as the pandemic, is resulting, we think, in a shift from informality to formalization, and this is being driven by self-interest. So what is the concluding thought? COVID-19 has opened a window of opportunity, irrespective of the ills, to reduce informality and therefore shrink the informal economy. And we need to institute measures to extend coverage. So what have we been doing? Well, we have taken up back the work that we started with unemployment insurance. This is being led by the Planning Institute of Jamaica, which is a body under the Ministry of Finance. And so NIS is not the driver here. And Mr. Pino, our first panelist, is quite familiar with the work that is being done. On the side of the NIS, we are conducting market research. Started doing research already before the pandemic, that is, doing an awareness and perception survey of the NIS to find out exactly what persons in different sectors think of the NIS and why they're not contributing, what do they know about the NIS, why? Because we need to know how to tailor our messages. We are on the verge also of starting a self-employed survey. We wanted to use marketing as a tool to help us to get persons to come in to register with the NIS and contribute consistently. So we may not be able to reach our online businesses, but if we make our activities or make NIS attractive enough and the benefits that we pay out, then it may just pull them in, and that is what we desire. We do already have different rates of contributions. Minimum rate, which is so meager, you get back so much more in just within the first year because of how small it is, taking into consideration our small scale operators. And we recently acquired a mobile unit to take our services into the hands of the people. But with COVID-19, we have to rethink our approach. And thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much, Magnus, for such an informative presentation. A lot of interesting things are happening in Jamaica and can not prove to be applied in other countries. So thanks so much, Ms. Magnus, for leading us into our question and answer segment.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And I would just like to move straight into it. And we actually have a question here for you, Ms. Magnus. How did you measure your informal sector? How was it measured?
Well, we actually use data from Statin. So we don't measure informality ourselves, but in terms of Statin. So they actually use the guide with the ILO. So they exclude agriculture and domestic work. Informal sector does not include illegal activities such as with drugs and so on. So that's excluded. So we leave that aspects of measuring informality to, to the experts in the area, and we use their data.
Okay, thank you. I'm seeing a lot of questions here in the chat actually. And I'm seeing that this question here may be for Mr. Any of our panelists can feel free to answer. What advice can you give as to practical measures that can be employed that would promote a culture of compliance among the informal sector in relation to enhancing coverage? So how can we encourage persons in the informal sector to actually enroll in these formal social security schemes?
I can try.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I saw a very interesting question all throughout the chat. I think there was another related question talking about the compliance in the formal sector, those who are not compliant too, and therefore I think the linkages within, let's say, the enforcement action from Social Security and Labor departments are crucial here. Finding synergy between these two, it's fundamental, but we know the limitations in resources, human resources, and also financial resources put some strains on that. Therefore, some models are being developed which are very interesting, that they call strategic compliance models, that work based on predictive models. So you collect a lot of data from the labor market, from Social Security administrative records, and also from microdata and other type of surveys that exist, and based also on historical analysis of inspections and compliance measures. So you develop algorithms, and then you can better target inspection. So you don't say just, okay, this month we go to the north, next month we go to the south, this month we go to this sector. So you look into which are in the formal sector, the sectors or the areas of the activities or the regions that are more prone to non-compliance, and therefore you target your efforts, and you are more effective. And we at the ILO, we have developed a strategic compliance model on that. I think other important things, it's basically to do a lot of advocacy and communication with these groups, but you also have to have something to communicate on. So if you don't have an offer that actually satisfies the needs of these people, so it's very difficult to engage in conversation, because the only thing you hear is what they need, what they want, and you cannot respond. So this may also work against you as a government in terms of providing responses. So it's delicate. There is an important initiative that provide good results is, as I mentioned before, to work with intermediaries. So try to convince key people, intermediaries. This is associations, cooperatives, unions, or commerce, or employees associations, and work through them and reach the very low level of the business unit in the informal sector. This is also a practice that works very good. Dominica has a very interesting approach, what they call community compliance officers. So these are high-level personalities from different communities that work for the Social Security institutions in improving the compliance, and is really having very good results. They are actually getting positive outcomes in terms of reducing non-compliance. And finally, I think what I call closing the circle is very important. That's being formal become a condition for business operations. And this involves different areas of the government. And I know some countries, for example, even if you want to buy a car and you are not up to date with Social Security, you cannot actually register your car to your name and things like that. So the banking system is very important, because the more you bank the business unit, the more follow up that you can do. So there are a number of things that you can do, but start by understanding what they need, and then craft a response to the needs they have.
And I wanted to also just follow up on that, speaking from the creative industry sector, as I would have presented on TUCO. What we have done as an organization is we have actually reached out to our membership. We have several, and of course, we understand right now we're talking about COVID-19. So, what we do is we have an online platform where we engage with the Calypsonians. We also have radio as a form of communication. We also have our Facebook page. And so there are different opportunities and spaces where we engage and we actually speak to their needs. And this is how we are able to identify what their needs are, because even though we have the COVID conditionalities and they can come to the offices when we do have less restrictions, we do have our platform for interaction. I also wanted to add that in terms of this informal economy and how do we deal with Calypsonians, we have actually partnered with WAC, which is a culture radio station in the south of Trinidad. And what we actually do is we have provided an online space. It has a studio at that facility, and we've actually been having shows online so that the Calypsonian comes together. There might be a band depending on the conditionalities at the time, and or they might be singing to tracks. And we have Cash App, and we have other opportunities for persons to actually go online and pay into um, uh, the online system for Calypsonians to make money during COVID-19. So that is another one of the facilities that we have provided from a social security standpoint to ensure that our Calypsonians, our main members, can have funding. So I just wanted to mention that as well.
And if I may add here, so much has already been said, but I can cite an example which brings me to the point that we need to understand our people and to understand the differences if we are going to get more compliance. So for instance, in Jamaica, we really recently started work with the ILO looking at our fisher folk. Now, sitting in an office, if you're not familiar with our fisher folk or fisherman, we say regularly, then you really don't understand the peculiarities surrounding this industry. So there are different types of fisher folk. We have the commercial fisherman or businesses, and we do have a little fisherman that have a boat. And what we learned is that for the little fishermen that have a boat, and they're the ones who are most vulnerable, that they can't read and write. So you have to understand your people. So if they can't read and write, so who does business for them? Interestingly, what we learned is that it is their spouses or their children who will conduct the business for them. So a part of getting compliance is for every market or every segment of the industry of the country, the business economy, the business sector that you want to target, that you have to understand them. You have to understand how to communicate with them. So if we're going to be having a session with fisher folk, certainly we cannot go in suits. We're going to have to wear a jeans and a polo shirt and speak the language of the common man, no standard English. But when we're going into an office, it's a different setup. So it is knowing the people and then coining the message so that everybody can have a shared understanding and see exactly what is in it for them.
If I may just add quickly, just to close off, because I think a lot has already been said. Continuing education is a must within social security system. There is a need to continually publish information on the value added of social security to individuals within the society. There's also the need implicitly to reduce some of the red tape. I know a lot of that has been reduced already, but further reducing the red tape in terms of filling forms or making it easier for information to be provided to the social security system also helps. In the chat, there was a comment about the use of field officers. So I know in St. Vincent and the Grenadines in particular, and as Mr. Pino would have mentioned, Dominica, there are actually officers that go out into the field. So if if there's construction occurring, you would have an NIS officer in St. Vincent turn up and inquire about whether or not persons are paying Social Security, or whether or not they are, whether the contract is paying on their behalf, or whether the persons are voluntarily enrolled. So those are just some of the options that I think that can assist with improving some of that coverage.
Thanks. I think we can take one last question. This again is related to workers in the formal sector who have informal working arrangements in terms of what policies and programs are in place, or probably a further question, what can be put in place, what has been successful in addressing those types of workers so that they also receive some kind of coverage.
If I may, from social insurance, let me just ensure I'm understanding. So the worker has two jobs then, a part of the formal sector and the informal.
Well, from what the question is asking,
Uh-huh.
sometimes the person may be working in the formal sector,
Mm-hmm.
but they may not have a contract or a document like that. So they are in a formal enterprise, but they have an informal relation.
Work arrangement. Okay. All right. So what we generally do, and it's something that we have been doing for a long time, which was mentioned before, is that, and which now is posing a challenge with the advances in technology, is that we do also, like Dominica have and St. Vincent, have a cadre of inspectors throughout the island. So in Jamaica, the country is divided into parishes, and within each parish, there is an office of the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. And for the activities of the NIS, we do have a number of inspectors. The number of officers vary from parish to parish depending on the size. And what they do is go into the institutions to not just to check the books, but also looking at the number of persons to see if there's a match between those present and the information on the books. It's not necessarily a perfect, because we do recognize that in a case like this, we are going to miss those persons. But we're just to say though that where someone may be in formal in one aspect and informal in another, the formal aspect of the engagement, once it is an established business that a social insurance entity has on the radar, and more we're going out more and more into the field to identify everyone, then we in Jamaica, we do have a cap in terms of contributions to make it affordable to everyone. So if your income far exceeds what you are then earning in your formal job, versus the informal occupation, what is important to us is that you are in fact contributing, so that at the end of the day, and the end of the day could be as soon as tomorrow, because more and more persons are developing lifestyle illnesses, that you are in fact covered. That is our major concern.
One of the interesting things that we do in Trinidad in terms of the creative industry sector, specifically for TUCO, because we've been speaking about the fact that there is this non-permanence and irregularity of income, as a professional artist, many Calypsonians and soca artists actually have formal jobs. You would be surprised. And so they actually have sort of engaged the informal sector by being a performer as a sideline career. But because that is more dominant in terms of the public, in terms of the optics, in terms of what the public knows about them, they're known as calypsonians and soca singers. But behind the scenes, they are actually informal jobs. And what we have provided between my office as the Director of Education and Research on the board, and together with the welfare officer, we actually engage these performers and ask them to give back into TUCO's coffers in order to help, again, providing this social security network, and have this funding base. So it's a fund that they give into to provide for not necessarily those who are lesser fortunate, but for those who are not part of the formal sector. And so that is another way in which the organization, through education and research to the welfare office, provides for the entire body of calypsonians and soca performers, and indeed our entire membership. Yeah.
Thanks to all our presenters, and for all the questions from our participants. I would like to now hand over to Professor Carl Theodore for him to give us some closing remarks. Now, Professor Theodore is Professor Emeritus, and he has decades of experience in the region in the areas of public sector economics and fiscal policy, as well as health economics. And he has written and spoken extensively both within the region and outside on these topics. So I'd like Professor Theodore to join us here now and close off our session with his comments.
You know, I enjoy the session this morning. In fact, it's an issue that was one of my concerns for a number of years, and because I always had a sense that the way the world was going, that the informal sector would be increasing over the years instead of getting smaller. I know there have always been attempts, as we were discussing even this morning, trying to get more people into the formal sector. But the way the economies are developing, it seemed to me that the pressure would be onto that the informal sector was going to get larger, and therefore we would have to find ways to extend our coverage. The discussion this morning, I think, really touched on the two issues three issues of concern. The first really was what does this relationship between the social security and the informal sector, what does it mean to say for the people themselves, for the members of the population? What does it mean for them? What does it mean for the economy? What does that relationship mean for the economy? And the third concern really, and I think we discussed that also, was how could we extend the coverage? How could we extend the coverage? And I think some important points came out that we could all go away with. And on the impact on the individual, I think the encouragement this morning that we should include gender as a focus to really help us to extend the coverage, to make sure that given that women are the main component of that sector, if we have a gender approach, then there's a very good sense. There's a very good sense. I'm sorry, there's a noise in the background. I'm sorry, this noise is coming from. Yeah. There's a sense that we would be extending coverage in the way that we should. And I think that was interesting. But on the social protection issue, the two-core discussion I thought was interesting, because what the two-core discussion showed us, is that social protection is not just an issue for the government or for a governmental type agency. In fact, if what the two-core model seems to be telling me is that if people in the informal sector could get together, then as they get together, they could approach different institutions within the society to ensure that the kind of social protection that they require for their members are going to be. And I think that is a model, I think, whether it is the Eastern Caribbean or the rest of I think the rest of us in the region should have a good look at that model, trying to get the different groups in the informal sector together, and as groups now, they try to approach the different institutions to get the kind of protections they want. I think that was a very good thing. As far as the impact on the economy, the fact of life of the informal sector, the size of the informal sector is an interesting issue. I mean, I was always thinking that normally it was somewhere between 25 and 40%, 25, but to hear that in Antigua it is 71% tells me that you know, that is something we are going to have to think about, because on the economic side, the problem with the informal sector is really the tax evasion problem, and that came out in our discussion this morning. There's a serious tax evasion. Now, this doesn't mean that tax evasion is only a problem of the informal sector. It is also a problem in the formal sector. But the fact of life is that if you're informal sector, the larger it is the larger, as Mr. Pino and I think Mr. Thompson said, the greater the problem of tax evasion is going to be. Now, having said that, then there is both Mr. Pino and Thompson seem to be saying, and is that, well, one way to deal with the issue is to try to formalize the informal sector. And I must admit that many years ago, I was very much against that kind of position. But I think I've grown more to it, because I suspect that with the way things are going, we are really going to have to operate on both fronts. I think we have to do things like what I think Mr. Thompson called, what he called it, well, I think it's basically reducing the red tape, but I think he's also making it easier for self-employed people to make contributions. I think we have to come up with mechanisms to do that, to make it easier for people in the informal sector to make contributions that would give them social protection. We have to do that. But I think we also have to go on the front of trying to make the informal sector smaller than it's. I think the two things that have to go together. I don't think it's one or the other. In fact, and in terms of extending coverage, you see Miss Magnus's point, and I think it's a point that we all have to take very seriously. You see this point about knowing your population, knowing exactly what their problems are, and finding a way to really communicate with them in a way that is really effective. That, I think, is the answer. That is central to any approach that we're going to do. We cannot come with some approach that we heard or saw working in some other country and say, well, we're going to try that. I'm sure there are things you could learn from other countries, but I suspect that dealing with this problem, it has to be dealt with as a national issue, as a local issue, as an issue that I mean, the people have to have a sense that you are in this thing with them. And as one of the presenters said, we have to make it much clearer to them what is the benefit to them of participating in a system which gives them the kind of social protection that it should have. So as I say, I think the discussion was rich. I think we got a number of points that we could go with, and things that we have to think about. And as again, Miss Magnus was saying in the end, I think what COVID has shown us, COVID has shown us is that it's not a question of coming to the end of COVID and going back to what we were. That is not it. What COVID has shown us is that, because COVID has revealed our weaknesses in a way that we probably were not willing to look at them before. And COVID is telling us that there are changes in our society that we need to make. There are changes that we need to, and I think this is one area where we have to make a much more concerted effort to try to make sure that social protection really becomes something universal. It is not a question of just the group people who are in the formal sector, that the informal sector has to be seen as regular, a component of our social protection system, as the formal sector is. So I think that has to be the approach that we have to take. So I want to thank all the panelists again for their presentations and for giving us a lot to think about. Okay, thank you very much.